inspiring you to set the marketplace ablaze in partnership with an awesome and limitless God. This is the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast, and this isn't business as usual. Here's your host and Chief Fire Igniter, Shay Bynes.
Welcome back to the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. This is your host, Shay Bynes, and our goal here is to inspire you to operate your business completely yielded and in partnership with our awesome and limitless God. Being a kingdom-driven entrepreneur is not the same thing as being a Christian who happens to be a business owner. A kingdom-driven entrepreneur is motivated by seeing an increase of the kingdom of God through the work they do in business, and they are propelled forward by operating from the truth of Matthew 6:33. They seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, knowing that all things will be added. So that's why we're here, and I'm so glad that you joined us today. Today's episode is sponsored by 127 Consulting. Have you ever had someone ask you what you do, and when you try to explain it, they don't get it? Or maybe you try to promote your business, but people aren't responding to your marketing? Well, you just may have yourself a messaging problem. And the good news is that you don't have to struggle in that area. Lee Bradshaw with 127 Consulting will help you to simplify and clarify your message so that you can connect with your audience, serve them well, and watch your business grow. So if you know that you have a business that changes lives, but you're struggling with how to communicate that, reach out to Lee by going to 127consulting.com. That's O-N-E, the number 27, and the word consulting.com. And now on to today's guest. My guest today is Stan Bullis, founding partner of Unbridled Companies, which is an expanding group of 28 businesses, at least at the time of this recording, could be more today. I don't normally read bios on this podcast, but in many ways, Stan's bio actually encapsulates the conversation that you're about to hear. So I'm going to read this. It says that Stan's driving passion is to restore people and places with a desire to start hundreds of businesses lasting hundreds of years, each model to be businesses of generosity, cultures of authenticity, and a collaboration of destinies. I often talk about how heaven has a unique blueprint for you and your business. And Stan's story is such a rich testimony of this truth. So this is a fantastic chat. Lean in and enjoy my conversation with my new friend, Stan Bullis. Stan Bullis, my new friend, what's going on, sir?
There's so much going on, I can't even tell you. It'd take a week.
I bet. Well, I have been looking forward to spending some time with you on the podcast. We've had a chance to connect once before. I've heard your name. The reason why I reached out to you, and I'd share this with you offline, that your name kept coming up in conversations that I was having with others. And it happened not once, not twice, not even 3 times, probably about 4 times. And then I remember I didn't get a chance to hear you at Heaven in Business when we were both speaking at the conference together. So I was just like, I've got to connect with Stan, and I'm so glad that we're getting an opportunity to do this today. So thanks for joining me.
And aren't we sharing a stage at some point this fall with Tub Alexander or something like that?
Yes, I think next spring. I think next spring that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, that's right.
If it's in the fall, you have something else going on too. But you and I are definitely with in the
March,
spring.
right. That's right. That's right.
So that's going to be fun. Yeah, super fun. Now,
maybe
okay,
a little dangerous too.
Oh, that too. And I sent him a text about that. So that's going to be fun. So I'm sitting here thinking about, I thought about this right before I hopped on with you, that your company name struck me. Now that I've had a handful of conversations with you and I've learned a little bit about your story, the fact that your company is called Unbridled. I need to know the backstory behind Unbridled, but before you give me the backstory on Unbridled, share just for those who just don't know anything about your company at all, just give us an overview of what you're doing.
Well, I would say at a macro level, we're restorers of people and places. But really on a day-to-day basis, we're serial entrepreneurs. And we just have a knack of starting small businesses with a specific blueprint that God gave us years ago. And that's grown into 28 businesses, from restoring buildings to hospitality to restaurants to now a hotel, and financial management, wealth management. And really, if you go down even one step from that, they're all businesses centered around a person's identity. So if we can have an idea and a person, and we've got a model, we can build a business out of it. And so
we're totally going to talk about that, because that is very different. Okay, so
yeah.
So Unbridled seems like the perfect
yeah.
name for what you just described, but talk to me about that.
Well, the backstory is I actually lived on an Unbridled Avenue. And
really?
and I was leaving, sort of the corporate world to start my own business. I was completely scared. And one of the things about living on Unbridled Avenue is that Unbridled's a famous racehorse. And when I would hand people my license, people would be like, "Well, that's a really cool street name." And then I'm thinking, wow, if I had my company name Unbridled, they would think that we like had our own street name. so it was like, but behind the scenes, it's Galatians 5:1, right? It is for freedom that Christ set us free, and that everyone deserves to run in freedom. And if we could be bold enough to name our company that, that would be an audacious goal to have to live up to. And we still try to live up to it. And it's hard to live up to it.
Wow. And did you say up to 28 companies now?
Yeah, we have 28 companies now. Yeah.
Okay. So when you I'm curious, like when you started, because we're going to talk about it present, but I want to go back for a second. When you started this, what, about 20 years ago now, right?
Yep. 20 years last month.
Did you have vision even close to what you're walking out now at that time? What was going on? Like, what had God put in your heart at the time of the start?
Yeah. So I came out of the hospitality background. So I was hotels for a long time, Ritz-Carlton hotels. Then got into the agency side, which is event planning. And so the answer is no. When we started Unbridled, it was an event planning company, and we just wanted to hire great people and unbridle the performance and do events around the world. And I remember telling my dad, if we made it 5 years, I would feel successful. But during that process is really when I became a believer, and God gave me Habakkuk 2, 2, and 3, write this revelation down. And for a period of 2 months, he was taking me through the Bible from a business point of view.
Yes.
And really challenging me, with like, tithes and offerings. Stan, what would it look like if you embedded your tithes and offerings in the first fruits of a company? And then he would show me the promise that follows that. And then it would be like Genesis 41. Hey, I want you to store 1/5. What does it look like for a company? And then parable of the talents, and later parable of the minas. Stan, I want you to, take the balance 60% and give it to the shareholders, but the shareholders should multiply, and that everything that you do should be a multiplication strategy. And so I started it like feeling like I was really on the edge with a kingdom strategy coming from a new believer's point of view.
Right.
Just hoping I could make it 5 years. And
wow.
so
that's extraordinary. I did not know that about your story. So you had already started the company before you became a believer. That all was kind of happening around the same time, it sounds like.
Exactly.
That is so cool.
Like my dad worked for the CIA, and so I grew up overseas. And so I was very multicultural, and so I had a real knack for sort of chameleonizing myself and my personality, and reading situations and people really well. And so the first half of my career, from 16, I started as a dishwasher. At 29, I'm president of a company.
Oh wow!
And so I faked my way from the dish room to the boardroom. And so at 29 to, I think it was 35 or so, the company that I became president, we built it from 12 million to 250 million, but I was faking it along the way. And so it's the typical story where you fall off the proverbial cliff, life's not working for you, you've got bad habits, and you're living for yourself and all the reasons. So I fall off the cliff, and at the bottom is where I meet God, basically.
Wow.
And then that's where he restores my identity and restores this thing called authenticity, and gives me a plan to follow. And that's what we've been following for the last 20 something years.
I love that. So there's something you said earlier that I want to dig into a little bit. So I caught part of it, but I think there's a whole thing here. You had mentioned this model. He was kind of taking you through the scripture and saying, what would it look like, for you to do this or to do first fruits? And you were kind of walking me through kind of a process of questions that he was posing for you. But then you said, and something about 60% for the shareholder. So there's something around a framework or a model here that I want to hear about that you're doing that's a bit different. What does that look like? Break that down for me.
Well, we call it, we're talking specifically about one pillar right now. There's three pillars.
Okay.
Collaboration of destiny, culture of authenticity, and businesses of generosity.
Okay.
So it all began in this, the first pillar was businesses of generosity. And it's generous to give 20% of your profits to charity, your tithes and offerings. We learned, through COVID that it's generous to store up 1/5, because when famine comes, it can be some of your times of greatest advancement. I mean, we're in the event planning business. We lost 50% of our business the week of March 9th during COVID. So we lost $50 million of $100 million in 1 week. But the generosity of storing up 1/5, we were able to keep 80% of our workforce. And actually, we had some of our best years through COVID because we were able to move in strength.
Yes.
The 60% that you're talking about is then, so out of 100% of profit, 20 is going to charity, 20, then wealth isn't bad, right? And so he said, I want you to distribute your profits to your shareholders, but it's a shareholder's responsibility, at least in my calling, is what he's telling me, is to have a multiplication strategy. So inside of the parable of the talents, which is centered around a person's ability, right?
Right.
The minimum standard, you should be earning interest. Minimum standard. So the goal is to be a multiplier. Right. And in the context of ability, if you're a multiplier, then you'll get more responsibility.
Yes.
So with good stewardship comes more responsibility. Parable of the minas is a very different thing because that parable doesn't mention ability. And so when the master sort of gave the investment into his people, he gave them each the same amount, and they came back with contrition, right? Your money's doubling. And then he says, what? Instead of being in charge of things, he says, take charge of cities. And so both of those were sort of, at least in my life, I'll get a principle.
Yes.
And I'll think I'll understand it, multiply. And then he'll follow it up with like an exponent of the original principle.
Yes.
Right. And so then you're like, there's this big awakening. You're like, oh, the parable of mine is this, such a higher calling. Right. Are you saying that your money can actually make money?
Yes.
And if I learn that, then there's access to influencing cities. Well, I want that more than I want more things. There's such thing as enough things. So
I love that. Yep. So I love that. So that was your starting point, and that was a framework in which you, for all of your businesses, for all the businesses, that's the framework for Unbridled. You mentioned two other things though. So you said this was kind of the generosity pillar. Yeah. You mentioned two others. What were the others?
Yeah. Cultures of authenticity.
Okay.
Collaborations of destinies.
Okay. Let's walk through each of those. What does that look like?
Okay. So I'm giving you two sort of, this is playing out linearly now. So we establish the company. I get scared. I sell 51% of the company, completely subordinate everything that is mine to do. And when things are out of order, then I think it's God's limiting his blessing because the structure isn't sound. So if I could quantify it, like there was the beginning, the blueprint that was, businesses of generosity. There's this middle piece where I diverted, what he wanted me to do and submitted it to someone else, and nothing would work. Well, in that process, what he was teaching me, he had moved us into a group home. So my wife and I are now living in a group home, helping people come out of severe trauma.
Wow.
And what he needed me to learn is things around values, that it's not what you do, it's who you are. And if you're moving in authenticity, you can go wherever you want because people are buying authenticity, not a product.
Right.
And so that sort of 5 to 7 years worth of era was really, really hard selling about who are we as a brand, character change, credibility, community, ways of being, what are the collective expressions of our brand, what is it? And I mean, there's always two sides of the story. So there's like the kingdom side, and then there's what's happening internally. Internally, I'm thinking like, how the heck do I get out of this really bad relationship?
Right.
Well, one of the ways of getting out of this, creating other things that help me get out of it. But the genesis of that was, if you're moving in authenticity, then you're not going to be confined by an industry. And then your brand promise is that those behaviors are going to continue. And then the identity quotient to that is then what are you doing? You're collecting identities that are moving in authenticity, and you're underpinning that with a process that allows new business to emerge.
Okay. I'm starting to see the story unfold here a bit. Okay.
Yeah.
So you start there, and then you went through that with the generosity piece, and he was showing you in scripture and showing you your assignment as it related to business in the kingdom. And so you start with that generosity piece. Yeah. Then you go to this phase where you're like, wow, you're getting to know more of who you are and how he's expressed through you. So you're getting this authenticity. How long was this period of time, Stan?
Like 7 years. Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah. So the Christian community calls it the wilderness.
Let's talk about that 7 years for a second, a little bit more. So I know what the fruit of that is, because you're talking about how that informed this next stage of business for you. Yeah, but what was some of you, if you think about the gold that came out of the very tough 7 years, what was it for you in your walk with God in business?
Man, I mean, there's so many. One would be, we're not all starting at the same place, so we shouldn't question each other's journey. What we should be doing is, pulling out the gold in people and talking about how we believe in them and helping them believe in something bigger than themselves. So that's sort of the core. That's what was happening at that community home where we were living. Is we were, people would come in and we were like, I'm just going to see you. I'm going to notice you, and I'm going to call out the things that are good in you. And so that has a massive impact today when we move later in this conversation, when we move into collaboration of destinies, is like everybody has a destiny. And even things like the verse around the crowd of witnesses cheering you on, he was like, man, Stan, what if we're the crowd of witnesses? Like, what if we behave like that? I get that it's a reference in heaven, but
yes,
what if we walked around cheering each other on?
Yeah.
Right. And so that was one. Watching someone go from 0 to 1 is so heroic, more heroic than watching someone go from 5 to 15.
Yeah.
Covenant relationship was a really big one. And there's lots of threads after that in our company where it's pretty easy to say we don't quit easy on people. It's hard to get into Unbridled, but we don't quit very easy on people. And so covenant relationship is a big one. The value of family dinner is another one. The value of hospitality. The value of being transparent, even down to, and that showed up in things like, we write these multi-million-dollar contracts, and you could go to one line item and see exactly what we get paid. Like there's no hidden fees.
Right.
So value of transparency in business, we would say if we could do business on a handshake, we would. And so many things inside of that authenticity. And the other thing is if so in my case, like some of authenticity is, I don't know, 5 people have access to my email accounts.
Wait, say that again.
Like 5 people have access to my email account. So
right.
And we move in a close circle. So I would say probably 60% of my emails aren't answered by me. Only it's answered with, it's right. Lindsay and Julie, and they're responding on behalf of me.
Yes.
And but there's transparency in that because, if I was having an affair, it would show up in those things. And so it's how you do things and how, yeah.
Wow. That there was a lot in that. That was a lot in that 7-year period. A lot.
Yeah.
So now when you landed at the end, when you were talking about that, was you made this phrase, something like we're collecting. You said you're collecting identities. So, and I know you must have been referring to the people who work with Unbridled. Yeah. And so this leads now into this phase around collaboration. And this is where we get to how Unbridled has 28 or 29, I can't remember now. Companies because of this phase of this focus on the fact that you're collecting identities and now you're collaborating. So talk about this, because this is very unusual. I remember when I heard this, when I heard this element of your story, I'm like, I have never heard that before.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times I like to use secular studies to prove spiritual realities. So there's a book out there, and if you read it, it's mostly new agey, but it's called Leading from the Emergent Future. Okay. And it comes out of the Sloan School of Business, so very reputable. And it's talking basically about quantum physics.
Yes.
And it basically says when Stan figures out who he is and Stan starts cooperating with the future, his future, guess what? Something in the cosmos, right? Of course, we know what that means, right?
Yes.
Begins to cooperate with Stan's identity. So you have the future pulling towards the today as you take as an individual your responsibility and pull towards your future.
Yes.
Well, to me, that's like a level of corporate productivity the world hasn't seen, right? So my thinking was, well, the best thing we can do is help people figure out who they are. Because if we can have a business structure and help people figure out who they are and why they're here, then we can leverage the future working today towards us. And so, then it began, I interviewed everyone that, comes to work for Unbridled. Now, like it's a little too big for that, but I still interview the supermajority. And my portion of the interview is, is their head and heart connected? And then I'm literally going, can I get a glimpse of who they're becoming? And if I can get a glimpse of who they're becoming in that conversation, then I can see whether we can help them get there. And if we can help them get there, then we should probably find a position for them.
Wow.
And then when they start working for us, usually there's 6 months or 12 months that are kind of weird because, we're not a big job description company. And so in that 6 months, what we learned at the Nest, our Unbridled Axe House, our group home, was to just watch people. So what would happen is you'd hire someone like, Jonathan Wield as an example. And we hired him as a marketing program guy. But the problems he kept solving were financial. And so, and everywhere he would go, he would create more possibility for us financially. And so ultimately today he's in his early 30s and is the managing partner of Unbridled Wealth, our wealth management group, helping companies and families establish banking systems inside their businesses. And so that's an example. If you bring somebody in that that their head and the heart are connected and that you can see where they're going, and then we just sort of put them in positions to let them keep doing that, right?
But what's interesting is that you're doing that. But if I remember correctly, there have been businesses that you have started. It's not even let me put them in a business that we already have. It's like the reason why you have so many is because there's also been instances where a new business was created based off of what you saw in that person and then seeing a need. Talk about it.
Yeah. Well, this will be kind of a fun story that will collapse two stories into one. And she'll laugh if she hears this. So I had a not so good, amazing assistant. So amazing person. One of the not necessarily so good at details.
Right.
Her name's Jessie. But Jessie and I had done a couple of building projects together. And she's 29 years old at the time. And she has an incredible knack for intentionally crafted spaces. And so we wind up, looking for new office space. We wind up, we like to do our homework. So we wind up in this old mansion built in 1892. And we're doing the site inspection to see if we're going to, if it's a piece, place that we're interested in. And I remember coming out of the mansion after, we sort of kicked the realtor out of there. And I'm like, see, this place is just garbage. And she's standing in the parking lot and she's weeping. She's just literally crying. And she's like, I don't know. There's something, this is such a good story about all of this coming together. She's like, I don't know. There's something about this place. And the address is 115, 3 ones, 5 Grace together. It's 8. And so I kind of pay attention to that stuff. And so, but I still don't want to do it. So I go home and I'm like, literally this is how it goes. God, if that's real, then can you give me some strategy? So that's us believing something bigger. So for the next 2 weeks, I get strategy about this building, what to offer, so we wind up buying this rundown mansion. And then I'm like, now what do we do? And then I remember like Jessie has this amazing gift. So sort of out of half ignorance, half brilliance, right? This is way in the beginning. I go, Hey, Jessie, do you want to start a construction company? And I will give you the renovation of this building as your first project. Now you gotta imagine, it's Denver, Colorado, so it's very, very difficult to build things. It's a historic mansion, 2 blocks from the Capitol. And 2 people who don't know the first thing about construction are like, we're going to start a construction company. So long story longer, we launched that. And then, so we stepped forward in faith, and then additional resources that have those join the company. And then a year after we moved in, it won the best historic preservation in the city of Denver for that year. Right. So literally the blind leading the blind. So then what happens is here comes Jonathan, who comes into my office and says, I don't have anything to do. I'm like, well, go find something to do. And he starts looking up historic tax credits. And so he discovers that if you're remodeling these old buildings, that you can get up to 50% of your investment back in tax credits.
Wow.
So now Jonathan, who's solving financial problems over here, goes away, comes back and says, you're not going to believe this. You're going to get a check for $900,000. So then we take that and we buy the next mansion. And then now we have 11 historic. So that creates that's 3 people that had no idea what they were doing originally.
Wow.
That sort of have cross collaborated because of their identity.
Yes.
And that's created at least 6 companies out of that.
Come on. That is so cool. But I also love that even though you're like, listen, this is blind leading the blind. I don't know anything about construction. You went to the Lord and was like, if this is you, I need strategy, and you got it.
Yeah.
So it was like blind leading the blind, but led by the one who knows it all. And you had strategy to move forward, even though you didn't have the experience, the knowledge, or whatever to do all the things, but yet operating from your place of identity, hers, and then Jonathan coming alongside. Now you guys have created something that then had even greater possibility for the future, because now you've done even more in that space.
Yep. and for us, so then that comes into, I was at least smart enough to write about it. So we have this sort of model that's called 7 steps to adjacent opportunity.
Okay.
So there's 7 steps that, and we don't have time to go into that maybe another time, but there's these 7 steps to go. If something's knocking on the door, these are the thing. And then you got to take a step.
Right.
Because we also had a business that lasted a week. So we took a step, and it was like,
and you're like, nope, we're not continuing. But I love that.
That means fund it, start it, get it, website off the ground. Not just it was an idea. It's like we actually started a business,
right?
And it died in a week. Yeah.
Wow.
So
but you have experience, and you created a framework to navigate this unusual kind of way of growing in business. One of the things I had asked you about right before we hopped on that I want to explore more, I was like, no, don't tell me anything more, because I wanted to talk to you about it just kind of live, is, when you have something like unbridled, which means pretty much unrestrained, like there's no restraints here, you started with that based off of a cool name, but then it's essentially been the context of these companies and how you've grown in these 3 phases that you have even been walking through in business and the kingdom culture created within it. And I'm wondering about what the faith walk is for you with that. Because I'm thinking, I listen to this stuff and I think, wow, this must be a dude who has always just had big vision and goes for it. And so is that just his nature and he just does it and he just does big things and it's just like, yeah, glory to God? Or is it like, has God been informing and a partnership with him? Has he been informing and increasing your capacity to dream and all of that? I want to know the God story of like that partnership for you in the midst of all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say no. I didn't start out. Remember, we started out saying if I could make it 5 years, I would be successful.
Fair.
What I would say is that my nature is like I'm a practitioner. I'm happiest when my hand is on the plow. And what I've learned along the way is if you're always doing things sort of in the natural or naturally, that's not very attractive, and I want to do things in a supernatural way. And so just because I think that all of our lives are meant to be extraordinary, I just really believe that. And so what he always asks me, he always talks to me in questions, right?
Yes.
And so now it's sort of like we've always wanted to own a hotel. And so now it's like when we're collaborating, co-laboring, and I believe it's that there's an art in dreaming, and probably an art with age that promotes me to just look beyond what I'm doing today and saying, okay, what's a bigger reality to this?
Yeah.
We buy one building, a hotel in Canyon City that we're working on. And, the bigger reality is now we own 7 all within 2 blocks of each other. And we're trying to transform a city through hospitality. Yeah. Meaning we're trying to just love people well. And so when there's one, I'm always looking for what's the bigger story here.
Has he ever asked a question? Story, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say the bigger story always has to be beyond my resources and my ability and my, time, which is probably why I think like the poverty spirit is what wars most against the church. Because if we can stop people from dreaming impossibility, then you've disrupted generations of right.
Yeah. So that's so good. You were talking about how he often poses questions to you. Has he ever asked you a question that completely and utterly just blew your mind? You're like, I don't even know what to do with that question. Like, what's one of the most wild questions that he asked you?
I think he's blowing I don't know if it's in a question format, but I think he's blowing my mind right now. And you touched on it earlier, like around the name Unbridled, or unleashing something, because it can be really it could be really misused, right? And it can mean so many things to different people.
Yes.
And Danny Silk's doing some corporate consulting with me, and just around corporate culture.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're just sort of chewing on, I'll chew on this stuff. It's like Graham Cook. I'll chew on it for years before it actually is that concept of managing your freedom, and how to not foster a punitive culture in business, but how to manage when someone's abusing their freedom,
Yes.
in a way where it's impacting other people's freedom.
Right.
And I got probably years worth of language to learn on this, but if you look at like the prison system, so we're in a prison town, people are in jail because they misuse their freedom.
Right.
Right. If you look at our kids and they do something wrong, the whole sort of my generation was, I told you not to do that, right? It's very punitive. Now that you did that, you've got to do this. And instead of being able to say, here's the freedom that we gave you, phone, car, whatever, and now the misuse of that freedom is impacting us and our family. And so now I don't want to take this away, but it's impacting us. And so when you can manage your own freedom well, then you can have those things back.
Right.
And so, and that ties back to two of our cornerstones. One is character. So character would be, this is who I am and I'm doing the right thing, but credibility is the sustained sort of progress of character.
Yes.
So you can have character in a situation, but if you don't have character often, then it's not credible.
Yes.
And so working in the context, there's 100 different like offshoots, inflections point this, but
it makes sense to me that you'd be thinking about this a lot, because the very nature of the business and the culture you're creating, it does create that space punitive. Of freedom.
Yeah. And it's not supposed to be punitive.
Right.
It's supposed to be empowering.
Yes.
And so we need to be talking about it from a position of freedom, not infraction.
Yes. That's so good. There was one thing no, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, one of the things we're really chewing on right now is, what's a great example, actually, unlimited PTO. It's kind of a buzzword.
Wait, say that again?
Unlimited paid time off.
Oh, so unlimited paid time off. Okay. Yes.
Right. And so in our company, and so there's lots of reasons where that sounds crazy, right? Right. And there's lots of stats that say it works, and there's lots of stats that say it don't work, and it's really a complicated thing. And you sort of pepper in sort of entitlement, and like it's a really, really core thing. And so we have to sort of process it back through these values that we've established, in our company.
Yes.
Community, like, does that foster community? Certainly at a macro level, Unbridled would sure say, unlimited freedom, but freedom isn't by nature unlimited.
Right.
Freedom by nature is responsible.
Yes.
And so how do we apply that? And so it's how do we apply our own freedom responsibly?
Yeah.
Right. And the first step is to understand that freedom's not free.
Yes. Facts. So when you ponder these things and you're considering different ways of expressing kingdom culture in your company, in ways that are just pretty non-traditional and stuff like that, do you typically take the approach of, I'm just going to take this risk and understanding this is a bit of an experiment and we're going to see how this goes? Or do you have to really sit with it for a while, formulate it, strategize around it? What's God's flow with you in doing this? I'm curious because of just the way you guys have been growing.
It depends. I mean, in this particular instance, I hate the idea.
Yeah.
But I have people around me that are really challenging me. And because we have our values, we can set up a playing field for debate that it's okay everybody knows I'm going to go on with this agenda. I don't like the idea.
Right.
But we have a system that can grade other people who may have the opposite agenda and put it into sort of a box that we can actually critically think our way through. So
Yes.
in one instance, it's having a collection of people that think differently and trying to have a open debate. But in this instance, I'm clearly coming in with an agenda.
Right.
And so just be aware that I can't. And so I've got Julie challenging me about, like, you can't actually say that. Like, you don't actually know that. And so that's, that's one. Sometimes what I would say is, if it's a position that we can venture into and back out of, we're pretty open-handed about it.
Yeah.
But in the case of like unlimited PTO, once you go down that, it would be very complicated to back out of that.
Yes.
And so I would look at that, like, back to the freedom. Like, imagine corporations have different field sizes. So maybe a corporation that is highly fear-based has a really small field.
Yes.
And maybe Unbridled has a larger field than most. If we're playing in the field of freedom, that's fine. Like, let's take chances. Let's back go. Yeah. But when we get up against the fence line and we're talking about either pushing the fence line or jumping over the fence,
yes,
you better be careful. So I think in nature, we're running a business. There's got to be structure. So my job is to try to get a big field for us. But if you're getting up against the fence line, then it gets nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have two other questions. So then, from a leadership perspective, I mean, you're coming from this perspective. How are you kind of cultivating this culture amongst a leadership team where you all then work well together to challenge, kind of pull back where you need to pull back, go forward where you need to go? Like, what have been some of the keys to cultivating that culture across more than just you?
I think, like, that's like our battle every day. And I think it would be, the best word that I could use for it is community. Like, that has to happen in the context of community, which is probably opening up the door to the other thing we're really battling around is remote work. Like, how do you operate a hospitality company that is highly creative? How do you launch new businesses that are largely, like, launched with good structure but inexperienced sort of management without proximity, right? Without them being near you? How do you know someone's credibility via Zoom? Like, really know someone's credibility. And but it's also unreasonable to think that everybody needs to be in the office all the time. Like, that may not be true, right? And so it has to happen. For me, it has to happen in the context of community and really knowing people and seeing their heart. And so it's probably connected read an article. Something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually read an article recently that I just saw, like, the headline, so it wasn't like I read the article, and it was talking about proximity bias, and I was like, because there's all these bias out there. I'm like,
yes,
man, if that's a problem, that someone's upset that someone was, like, sitting next to someone and got a career break.
Right.
So I'm like, isn't proximity, like, a good thing?
Right. Usually.
Yeah,
Well, that's probably kind of the answer to the other thing I was wondering about, because I was asking about the leadership level, but then I also think about, with so many companies and with, I don't know how many employees are there across Unbridled Companies? I
mean, so I would say there's over 400 FTEs.
Yes.
Full-time employees. But when you sort of sift it down, you're ultimately, my job's to export culture.
Yes.
And so there's a handful there's probably 10 of the 28 companies that I'm very involved in,
Okay.
because they're in the context of who I am as a
Yes.
person. So there's some that I don't deal a lot with. There's some that I deal a lot with. There's some that have managers underneath me. There's some where I'm the sole guy. And there's some, and so our sort of family office, which is a super small team of like 5 people, our job is to kind of oversee them all and like go, this company over here needs a moment of inspiration. This company over here has culture work to do. This
Yes.
company over here is in a moment of bravery, and to help lean into where they are in their business cycle.
Absolutely. I was just thinking how apostolic this is. what you're,
that's
you're
the right
doing
word
here.
for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Very much so. And then having to equip apostolic people so that other people can have the ability to establish the culture of what God's doing with Unbridled in the various places, and then it doesn't all land on you to have to be able to do that in all of the places.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. So, all right. So we've talked a little bit about kind of what you're working through now, but I am curious to know, what's God put on your heart right now that you're super excited about? Like, you're always dreaming, that next step, that next level. So I'm curious about what's been on your heart right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Canyon City thing is interesting. It's a county of 15 prisons. So, the question driving down the road was, Stan, wouldn't it be interesting to see what it would be like to put a company like Unbridled, who wants to set people free, in a county designed to keep people locked up? And so, and I say that like that's a lofty thing to contemplate, but we have these 7 buildings on 2 blocks of Main Street with a mission of restoring people in places. So we're definitely restoring old buildings, and we're creating economies, and so I'm excited because I think that we're creating a prototype for other rural Americas.
Yes.
That so that's in a sort of a old manish kind of like this could be the thing, sort of, that's the big.
No, yeah. I love that. And I'm curious. So you talked about the restoring of the places, which you absolutely are doing. What's on your heart as it relates to restoring people? So when you're thinking about how can Unbridled make a difference, and I think I've heard you use the language like restore the city to like the God's dream for that city. How do we become a part of restoring it to God's original dream for that city? What does it look like on the people side? I understand the places side. Talk to me about the people side.
Well, so inside of Unbridled, we have our nonprofit Unbridled Acts.
Okay.
And Unbridled Acts, inside of Unbridled Acts, has a thing called the Identity Fund. And so we pay 50% of our team members and extended families counseling. And so the goal there is to really destigmatize therapy.
Yes.
And provide places for people to go where they can connect with their identity and discover that. And ultimately you're building better families. And and then that's sort of, they kind of work symbiotically, because we already discovered before, when people discover who they are and they start, so the corporate part of that is create systems that allows people to step into their identity.
Yes.
The nonprofit side is create systems that allow people to discover their identity.
So good.
And so if they can discover it, then we can place it. And so, the other thing I was going to say to the previous question was, what's exciting me is I have to learn now the power of being the rear guard. And so, obviously Jesus says, I'm the rear guard. And all of our joints are designed to go one way. And so I'm learning, it's painful, but I'm learning sort of it's maybe grandfathering. Like I'm beginning to learn the joy.
You act like you're an old man, Stan.
Yeah. I'm learning the joy of allowing people like Jonathan and Jesse and Dave Sandy and they to pass And then my job is to take my little car, in like a race car analogy, and get it on their back bumper and
Yes.
just draft them so they can go faster
Yes.
and be there if something goes wrong. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing when that's done with grace.
Yes. Yes. And so, but
Doing
not
it with
always an
grace is
easy thing
hard.
for you right now is what it's sounding like. It's like not always, there's the letting go at, there's the things that you have to let go of in
Yeah.
order to be able to do
Yeah.
that with grace.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
True.
People can't see you because we're on video, but your face just spoke volumes to me in that in those last 30 seconds. That's it's the thing that's exciting, but it's the thing it's also the stretch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that he's got me out of more bad deals than he ever got me into good deals. And so, and that just means that's what rear guard means to me. Like if we all just lived adventuresome and just opening up new territories, and then when it's a mistake, go, I need some help. Right.
I love it. Well, I love your heart. You really absolutely carry the Father's heart as it relates to restoration, and I think that's beautiful. And I love what God's doing through you and your team. And it's really great. I'm believing that this conversation for many who are listening is just like, it inspires a new thought. It's like, it inspires a new thought of what's possible with God, and even asking God, allowing God to ask you big questions and being willing to ask God big questions, And I think that's really good. So Stan, I appreciate you. For those who want information about how to connect with you and Unbridled, like where do people go?
Just to go Bullis at unbridled.com.
Unbridled.com?
Yep.
All right. Very good. And you guys, there's a lot of companies across a lot of industries. So you've got to go there and learn and see where you might want to plug in and connect. Good stuff. Stan, thank you so much for joining me today. I enjoyed our chat.
Me too.
Loved my chat with Stan. I could have talked to him for another 2 hours. Super good stuff. But I have with me here Mr. Bynes, my dear husband and our CEO, to bring his takeaways. So what's going on, Phil?
All is well, my love.
Good. So what did you take away from my chat with Stan?
The first one I have here is God reveals our authentic identity in phases, right? And this is something that we know around here. It's like we'll know as we follow on to know as the scripture says, right? But he said something very specific, and that's what caused that particular point to stick out to me. He said, everyone starts at different phases, so don't judge someone else's journey. And so that's how he kind of looks at his team. Like they're all starting from different places. He's not going to judge their journey. He's just along for the ride, bring them in wherever their starting point is. Let's see what God does, right? And so he talked about giving them spaces. He would hire people and not necessarily have a specific place to put them, right? And he would allow that identity to be revealed. What are the problems that they wanted to fix? And then that was usually a clue into their identity, and that's how they've grown as a business. So that's my first point.
Yeah, that's good.
The second one here is, if you find a team member whose head and heart are connected, you can grow something special based in that individual's identity. And this is kind of the story of how Unbridled has developed multiple companies. That same thing I was just talking about. Once a person kind of finds who they are on the team and their heart is connected to the movement or the business, then you can give them some freedom, and their hands will find something to do. Right? It's almost like the scripture, whatever your hands find to do it. He talked about that, like with team members. Like one team member came and said, I don't have anything to do. He's like, go find something to do. Right. Right. And what they did is they found some stuff and they started to solve problems that were in alignment with their identity. And I thought that was so eye-opening of how that can flow in that particular context of business.
And very countercultural in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very countercultural.
And the third point I have here is, when you have spent the time to develop your team, you will come to a point in which you have to allow them to lead as you come behind them and push. And that's kind of the story of his current stretch that he was talking about with you. right? And so
Yeah.
that's it. What he used the actual word, he has to become the rear guard. Is
That's
that
what I
he
think he
said?
said. Yeah, need to be a rear guard. Yeah, yeah, which
Yeah,
is
but that's so good.
yeah,
And
good
and
stuff.
it's a sign that you've allowed your team to mature, right? I think the challenge that we have as individuals is, we bring people on, let's say from the context of business, we bring someone on our team and we give them things that they should do. Okay, you do this, you do that. And we put them in a box and we don't allow them to grow outside of that box. But the way that Stan has set up his organization, it really is it's the open way to help people find their identity and actually find growth within the walls of or the confines of his business or his company. I think is very kingdom in nature, right? And thus we see how people can grow when you plug them into their identity.
Yeah, good stuff. Love it. Yeah, I really enjoyed my conversation with him. I'm looking forward to having another one at some point. So it'll be interesting to see what's that development process been for him as the rear guard. that next layer of seeing like a next generation of folks coming around something and growing and being cultivated. It's just super goodness. I love it. For those who are listening, if this is your first time listening to the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur podcast, welcome. Glad that you are here. For those who are not aware of this resource that we have for you and want to get further connected and grow and really engaging God in your work, because that's what we're all about, doing business in partnership with God. I want to make sure that you know about a resource that we have called Seek First the Kingdom. And it's 12 questions that really help you to engage God, to really grab a revelation of his mind and heart concerning your business and how you're serving in the marketplace. And so if you want to grab that, I encourage you to get that. It is free and it is found at meetingwithgod.biz. That's meetingwithgod.biz. And go grab that, and don't just grab it, don't just read it, but actually engage God with the questions within it. And I believe there will be a lot of goodness awaiting you in the midst of that process and engaging God in that way. Mr. Bynes, anything that you want to share before we get out of here?
I want to say this. If you guys have listened to the podcast, you enjoyed the podcast. If you have not rated this podcast yet, I want you to pause right now. I know we're at the end, but pause anyways. Take the time to open up the app, whatever app you're looking at, you're listening in, and give us a rating. Give us a 5-star rating, if that fits with your heart. Give us a rating, even if it's a 1-star rating, but tell us why. Right? I think this is a perfect opportunity as we're getting ready to just ahead of the new year, right? And so just do it. Don't hesitate. Do it now. All right, I'm done.
We will talk to you more next week on the next episode of the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. Take care and God bless.
Thanks for joining us on the Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we encourage you to subscribe and spread the word. And don't forget, you can gain access to even more resources, plus a thriving community of fire starters by visiting our website at kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com.